They came armed, confident, and uninvited. What they found was something stronger, something watching. From torn campsites and crushed cages to missing men and remains no animal should leave. Each case points to one terrifying possibility. In this video, we present 6 chilling encounters that many believe are the deadly work of Bigfoot. Whisper Pine Game Reserve sprawled across 12,000 acres of untouched wilderness in central Florida, 30 miles southwest of Okeechobee. On June 6, 2025, Kyle Dennison entered Whisper Pine through an unmonitored section along the western boundary. He carried specialized trapping equipment designed to capture large cats without damaging their valuable pelts. His plan involved setting snares along known panther trails near a watering hole that cameras had identified as a frequent gathering spot. Mark Harbin, another local poacher, had been tracking the same area independently. The 41-year-old had positioned himself approximately 200 yards from Dennison's location, hoping to intercept any panthers that might escape Dennison's traps. Harbin later told investigators that he observed Dennison through binoculars as the man carefully positioned his equipment near fallen cypress logs. According to Harbin's account, Dennison had been working methodically for nearly 2 hours when something emerged from the dense undergrowth behind him. Harbin reported seeing a massive figure, at least 8 feet tall, covered in dark, matted hair. The creature moved with surprising stealth through the swampy terrain, approaching Dennison from his blind spot. Harbin claimed that the creature grabbed Dennison by his shoulders and lifted him completely off the ground. Dennison's startled shouts echoed across the swamp for only a few seconds before the creature hurled him against a massive cypress tree trunk. The impact produced a sickening crack that Harbin heard clearly from his distant position. Dennison's screaming stopped almost immediately. Terrified by what he had witnessed, Harbin abandoned his equipment and fled through the swamp toward his vehicle. He later estimated that the entire attack lasted less than 30 seconds from initial contact to complete silence. The following morning, park rangers conducting routine patrol discovered scattered remains approximately 400 yards from where Dennison had been setting his traps. Senior Ranger Patricia Velasquez reported finding pieces of human remains distributed across a 100-yard radius. The victim's ribcage had been cracked open with tremendous force, and several major bones, including the entire spine, were missing entirely. Dr. Marcus Chen, the forensic pathologist who examined the remains, noted that the pattern of injuries suggested an attack by an extremely powerful predator. However, the claw marks found on nearby trees and the victim's clothing did not match any known species in the region. The spacing between individual claw marks measured nearly 6 inches, far exceeding the dimensions of Florida black bears or any documented predator in the area. Wildlife officials theorized that an unusually large black bear might have been responsible for the attack. They pointed to recent drought conditions that could have driven bears to more aggressive behavior when defending territory. However, several inconsistencies troubled the investigation team. Bear attacks typically leave distinctive bite patterns on bones, which were absent from Dennison's remains. Additionally, the force required to separate a human spine completely exceeded the capabilities of regional bear populations. Dennison's abandoned trapping equipment remained untouched at the original site. The expensive snares and specialized tools showed no signs of disturbance, suggesting that whatever killed Dennison had no interest in the mechanical devices. This detail particularly puzzled investigators, as bears typically investigate and often destroy unfamiliar objects in their territory. Mark Harbin provided his eyewitness account to authorities 3 days after the discovery. However, his credibility suffered due to his own illegal activities in the reserve. Wildlife officers noted several inconsistencies in his testimony, particularly regarding the creature's appearance and behavior. Harbin insisted that the attacker moved upright on 2 legs and possessed human-like hands, claims that officials dismissed as panic-induced hallucinations. Within 2 weeks of giving his statement, Harbin disappeared entirely. His landlord reported that he had abandoned his apartment without notice, leaving behind personal belongings and owing 3 months' rent. His pickup truck was found abandoned at a rest stop near the Georgia border, but Harbin himself vanished without further trace. Local residents familiar with the area began reporting unusual changes in wildlife behavior following Denison's death. Experienced hunters noted that the typically vocal swamp ecosystem had grown unnaturally quiet during evening hours. Bird populations seemed to avoid the region entirely, and even alligators appeared less active in nearby waterways. The official investigation concluded that Kyle Denison died from a black bear attack, despite the anomalous evidence. Park authorities increased security patrols and posted additional warning signs about dangerous wildlife. The Chittagong Hill Tracts represented one of Bangladesh's last remaining wilderness areas, covering over 5,000 square miles of mountainous terrain along the border with Myanmar. Rauf Qadir had built his reputation as one of the region's most successful wildlife poachers over a 15-year career. The 42-year-old operated primarily in the gibbon trade, capturing live specimens for wealthy collectors in Thailand and Malaysia. His methods involved using trained dogs to locate gibbon families, then employing dart guns to sedate the animals for transport. Qadir's success stemmed from his willingness to venture deeper into the forest than most poachers dared, accessing territories that remained largely unexplored. In March 2008, Qadir received intelligence about a large gibbon colony inhabiting a remote section of bamboo forest near the Myanmar border. His contact, a local tribal hunter named Salim Dan, had reported seeing at least 12 individuals in the area, representing a potential profit of over $30,000. The location required a 3-day trek through unmarked territory, but the potential rewards justified the risk. Salim Dan served as Qadir's primary tracker and guide throughout the hill tract. The 38-year-old possessed intimate knowledge of the forest's geography and animal behavior patterns. Despite his collaboration with poachers, Dan maintained respect for traditional tribal beliefs about forest spirits and protective entities that supposedly guarded certain areas from human intrusion. The expedition began on March 15th, with Qadir and Dan carrying enough supplies for a week-long operation. They traveled light, using established deer trails and river crossings to navigate the challenging terrain. The bamboo forest they sought lay in a valley system that had remained unmapped by government surveyors, accessible only through a narrow gorge that local tribes considered sacred ground. On their second day, the pair encountered their first signs of the gibbon colony. Fresh droppings and territorial markings indicated a healthy population inhabiting the bamboo canopy above. Qadir began setting up his equipment, including motion sensors and feeding stations designed to attract the animals to specific locations where capture would be easier. Dan later reported to authorities that their third morning in the forest began normally, with both men checking their equipment and preparing dart guns for the anticipated capture operation. The gibbon calls seemed unusually agitated, but Qadir dismissed this as normal territorial behavior. Around midday, they located a family group of 5 gibbons feeding approximately 40 feet above ground level. According to Dan's testimony, Qadir positioned himself beneath the feeding area and began preparing his dart gun for the first shot. The tracker remained about 30 yards away, maintaining visual contact with other potential escape routes the gibbons might use. The forest around them had grown unusually quiet, with even the constant background chorus of insects falling silent. Dan reported that something large began moving through the bamboo grove behind Qadir's position. The sound differed from typical forest animals, producing a rhythmic pattern that suggested bipedal movement. The tracker called out a warning, but Qadir remained focused on his target above. The movement grew closer, accompanied by what Dan described as heavy breathing and the snapping of thick bamboo stalks. Qadir apparently sensed the approaching presence and turned from his position. Dan witnessed his partner raise the dart gun and fire multiple shots in rapid succession toward the bamboo grove. The shots were followed immediately by an aggressive roar that neither man had heard before. Qadir began shouting warnings and retreating toward Dan's position when something grabbed him from behind. The tracker reported seeing a massive figure emerge from the bamboo, standing at least 8 feet tall and covered in dark hair. The creature seized Qadir around the waist and began dragging him backward into the dense vegetation. Qadir's screams echoed through the forest for nearly a minute before abruptly ending. As Dan turned to flee, he stumbled upon the body of a second poacher, 26-year-old Aminul Haq, who had joined the expedition secretly the previous night. Haq's body was found partially buried near a game trail, with signs of blunt trauma and large claw marks. Don abandoned all equipment and fled through the bamboo maze toward their entry point. He reached the nearest tribal settlement after 2 days of continuous travel, arriving in a state of severe dehydration and psychological distress. Village elders contacted regional authorities, who organized a search party to investigate Don's claims. The rescue team included local police, forest department officials, and several experienced trackers from the area. The search party discovered the abandoned campsite after following Don's directions for 3 days. They found most of the equipment scattered across a wide area, with clear signs of a violent struggle. Qadir's dart gun had been bent into an unusable shape, and several bamboo stalks showed deep gouges that appeared to be claw marks. Further into the forest, searchers found Haq's shallow grave and confirmed the presence of 2 victims, not one. Investigators located human remains approximately 200 yards from the original campsite. They discovered several bone fragments, including a partially intact leg bone that showed distinctive bite marks. The forensic examination revealed that the bite patterns were inconsistent with any known predator species in the region. The spacing and depth of the marks exceeded the capabilities of tigers, leopards, or bears. Dr. Ahmed Hassan, the forensic pathologist who examined the remains, noted that the bone damage suggested an attack by an extremely powerful predator with unusual dental characteristics. However, the limited evidence made species identification impossible. The official investigation concluded that Qadir had been killed by a tiger, despite the inconsistencies in the evidence. The second death was omitted from the official report, possibly to avoid public panic. Local tribal communities rejected the official explanation, citing their traditional knowledge of forest guardians that protected sacred areas from exploitation. They claimed that Qadir had violated ancient taboos by entering the restricted bamboo grove, triggering a defensive response from the forest's supernatural protectors. Salim Don never recovered from his experience in the bamboo forest. He withdrew from his tracking activities and refused to discuss the incident with anyone outside his immediate family. The once confident guide became increasingly reclusive, spending his days staring toward the distant mountains where his partners had disappeared. The Arvenak National Range stretched across the remote northern section of the Carpathian Mountains, encompassing nearly 800 square miles of pristine wilderness. Adrian Stoica had established himself as a controversial figure by 1983, operating as a rogue biologist conducting unauthorized and highly invasive wildlife studies across the region. The 47-year-old former forestry worker possessed intimate knowledge of wolf pack territories and movement patterns throughout the Carpathians. His reputation extended beyond scientific curiosity, as local communities suspected him of disrupting pack dynamics and endangering wildlife populations through unauthorized tagging and tranquilization. Stoica operated with obsessive dedication, using tranquilizer darts, GPS tags, and hidden monitoring stations to track wolves during their most vulnerable periods. He maintained a network of hidden supply caches throughout the mountains, allowing him to remain in remote areas for weeks without returning to civilization. His activities had disrupted several wolf populations, contributing to a noticeable decline in pack stability and natural behaviors across the national range. The biologist's persistence had made him increasingly bold by June 1983. Intelligence from park rangers suggested that Stoica planned to target a particularly large pack that inhabited the Deadwood Gorge area. This pack, numbering at least 15 individuals, represented his most ambitious operation to date. The potential scientific value of their tracking data exceeded anything he had attempted previously. On June 18, 1983, a group of university students from Bucharest discovered 2 sets of human remains while conducting a botanical survey near Deadwood Gorge. The students, led by Professor Elena Popescu, had been documenting rare plant species that thrived in the unique microclimate created by the dead timber and new forest growth. Their discovery occurred approximately 2 miles from the main hiking trail, in an area that received few visitors throughout the year. The remains were immediately recognizable as human due to scattered clothing and personal effects. However, the condition of the bodies shocked even the experienced professor, who had encountered animal attack victims during previous field studies. One victim's face had been completely destroyed, making immediate identification impossible. The torso showed evidence of massive trauma, appearing to have been split open with tremendous force. The second body, later identified as Adrian Stoica, a visiting biologist from Cluj, accompanied by a friend, showed similar trauma. Both victims carried equipment related to wildlife tracking and chemical immobilization. Park authorities arrived within hours of the discovery, accompanied by regional police investigators and a forensic specialist from Cluj-Napoca. Initial examination revealed that one victim had been carrying tranquilizer darts, tagging tools, and containers of sedative chemicals. Personal identification found in the victim's wallet confirmed that the remains belonged to Adrian Stoica. The second body was also confirmed to belong to an individual assisting with Stoica's research activities, though neither had permits to operate within the national range. The investigation team noted several disturbing aspects of the crime scene that complicated their analysis. Stoica's tranquilizer rifle, a modified CO2-powered dart gun, had been bent into a distinctive U-shape. The weapon showed no signs of impact damage from rocks or trees, suggesting that something had applied enormous pressure to deform the reinforced barrel. No known animal in the region possessed the strength necessary to accomplish such destruction. Dr. Mircea Ionescu, the forensic pathologist assigned to examine the remains, documented extensive injuries that defied easy explanation. The victims' rib cages had been crushed with such force that several bones had been driven completely through the torsos. However, the most puzzling aspect involved the complete absence of typical predator bite marks on the recovered bones. The investigation expanded to include Stoica's equipment sites throughout the immediate area. Rangers discovered several tranquilizer darts and GPS collars that had been systematically destroyed, appearing to have been crushed by something with tremendous weight and strength. The destruction pattern showed clear impressions in the soft earth that resembled large footprints, but the details remained too unclear for definitive analysis. Ranger Gheorghe Marinescu, who had been tracking unauthorized activity in the region for over 5 years, examined the footprint evidence with particular interest. His preliminary report noted impressions that measured approximately 18 inches in length and showed 5 distinct toe marks. Most significantly, the impressions lacked the claw marks that would be expected from bears, the largest predators in the region. The official investigation concluded that Stoica and his companion had been killed by a brown bear, possibly defending cubs or territory from the biologist's intrusion. Authorities cited the remote location and the victims' unapproved activities as contributing factors that had placed them in dangerous proximity to large predators. The deformed rifle was attributed to the bear's powerful jaws, despite the unusual pattern of damage. However, several investigators privately expressed doubts about the official conclusion. The forensic evidence suggested an attack by something far more powerful than any documented bear in the Carpathians. The systematic destruction of tracking equipment indicated intelligence and purpose that exceeded typical animal behavior patterns. Local communities and villages surrounding the national range received news of the deaths with mixed reactions. While few mourned the controversial biologist or his associate, many residents expressed concern about what had killed them. Elderly villagers began discussing the Umbra Omului, a legendary creature that supposedly protected the deep forests from those who would harm the wildlife. These folklore accounts described a massive humanoid figure that walked upright through the mountains, serving as a guardian spirit for the animal populations. According to tradition, the Umbra Omului remained invisible to those who respected the forest, but dealt harshly with individuals who threatened the natural balance. Stories claimed that the creature possessed strength far exceeding any normal animal and could move silently through even the densest timber. Following the deaths, wolf populations in the Deadwood Gorge area began showing signs of recovery. Park rangers documented increased pack activities and successful breeding seasons that had been absent during Stoica's most active period. The ecosystem appeared to be rebalancing itself without the constant pressure of human interference. No other unauthorized researchers or poachers attempted to operate in the Deadwood Gorge region after 1983. The combination of the violent deaths and persistent local legends created an effective deterrent that protected the area more successfully than any law enforcement efforts had managed. The Deadwood Gorge area retained its reputation as a place where natural forces operated beyond human understanding. Hikers and researchers who ventured into the region reported an atmosphere of watchful silence, as if something unseen monitored their activities from the shadows between the living trees and ancient deadwood. Bukit Satwa rainforest encompassed over 3,000 square kilometers of primary tropical rainforest in central Sumatra, representing one of Indonesia's most biodiverse ecosystems. Dino Marpong had operated as a black market wildlife dealer throughout Southeast Asia for over 12 years by 1995. The 39-year-old specialized in capturing live specimens of endangered species for wealthy collectors in Japan, Singapore, and Hong Kong. His reputation rested on his ability to obtain animals that other dealers considered impossible to acquire, including juvenile orangutans and rare bird species that commanded prices exceeding $50,000 each. Marpong's operation employed local guides and porters who possessed intimate knowledge of forest systems and animal behavior patterns. He maintained a network of contacts within research institutions and conservation organizations, providing him with intelligence about wildlife populations and security measures. His business model involved quick strikes into protected areas during periods of minimal surveillance, using specialized equipment to capture animals without causing damage that might reduce their market value. Indra Harto served as Marpong's primary field assistant and guide for operations in Sumatra. The 28-year-old had grown up in a village adjacent to Bukit Satwa, developing exceptional skills in forest navigation and animal tracking. Despite his participation in illegal activities, Harto maintained traditional beliefs about forest spirits and supernatural guardians that supposedly protected certain areas from human intrusion. In November 1995, Marpong received information about a family group of orangutans inhabiting a section of Bukit Satwa that had been previously inaccessible due to swampy terrain. Recent drought conditions had lowered water levels sufficiently to allow access to the area, presenting a rare opportunity to capture young orangutans during their most vulnerable period. The potential profit from successful capture exceeded anything Marpong had attempted in Indonesia. The operation began on November 12th, during a new moon phase that provided maximum darkness for their illegal entry into the conservation zone. Marpong and Harto carried specialized equipment, including dart guns, transport cages, and climbing gear necessary for canopy work. They were accompanied by two assistants, Yanto Siragar, a 25-year-old porter with previous experience supporting poaching expeditions, and Budi Anwar, a 32-year-old former tracker turned mercenary guide. They planned to remain in the forest for 3 days, allowing sufficient time to locate and capture multiple specimens. Their target area lay approximately 15 kilometers from the nearest research station, accessible only through unmarked trails that required expert navigation skills. The terrain presented significant challenges, including river crossings, steep ravines, and sections where fallen trees created nearly impassable barriers. Harto's local knowledge proved essential for making progress through the difficult landscape. On their second day, the group located clear evidence of orangutan activity in their target area. Fresh nests, feeding signs, and territorial markings indicated a healthy population that included at least 2 juvenile individuals. Marpong began setting up his equipment, focusing on areas where the orangutans appeared to spend their daylight hours foraging and socializing. According to Harto's later testimony to police, their second night in the forest passed without incident. However, the third morning brought an unusual atmosphere that made him increasingly uncomfortable. The normally vocal forest had grown unnaturally quiet, with even the constant background noise of insects and birds falling to barely audible levels. The orangutans they had been tracking seemed to have vanished entirely, leaving no fresh signs of their presence. Marpong dismissed his partner's concerns as superstitious nonsense and continued preparing for the capture operation. He had invested significant resources in the expedition and refused to abandon it based on what he considered to be Harto's irrational fears. The dealer boasted about his dominance over the jungle environment and his ability to take whatever he wanted from the forest. As evening approached on their third day, Marpong positioned himself near an area where orangutans typically descended to lower canopy levels for feeding. He had loaded his dart gun with tranquilizer doses, calculated to immobilize adult orangutans without causing permanent harm. Harto, Sirigar, and Anwar remained approximately 50 meters away in different directions, maintaining communication through pre-arranged hand signals. The forest around them had grown completely silent by dusk, creating an oppressive atmosphere that Harto found increasingly disturbing. He reported later that the silence felt unnatural, as if something large and predatory had entered the area and frightened away all other wildlife. The air itself seemed to carry a sense of impending danger that made him want to flee immediately. Around midnight, Harto witnessed something moving through the forest canopy above Marpong's position. The movement differed from typical orangutan behavior, producing sounds that suggested something much larger navigating between the trees. The guide called out warnings to his partner, but Marpong remained focused on his equipment and dismissed the concerns as nervousness. The creature descended from the canopy with surprising speed and silence. Harto described seeing a massive figure covered in dark hair, standing at least 7 feet tall, with shoulders broader than any human he had ever encountered. The creature moved with purpose toward Marpong's position, approaching from behind, while the dealer remained unaware of its presence. Marpong apparently sensed the creature's approach at the last moment and attempted to turn around with his dart gun ready. However, the creature seized him before he could fire, lifting the man completely off the ground with what appeared to be minimal effort. Harto reported hearing Marpong's terrified screams echoing through the forest as the creature carried him away from the clearing. Moments later, Sirigar was heard shouting in panic from his position. Harto glimpsed movement in the trees again, another massive silhouette, or perhaps the same one, descending swiftly in the direction of the porter's voice. The shouting ended with a strangled cry. Harto did not see what happened, but heard thrashing and a disturbing crunching sound that silenced the forest entirely. Then came a final scream from deeper in the woods. Anwar, stationed farthest from the group, radioed in once in a shaky voice before it was abruptly cut off by an inhuman roar. His last words were barely audible. "It's watching me." The radio hissed dead afterward. The screaming continued for several minutes before gradually fading into the distance. Harto waited in his hiding place until complete silence returned, then fled through the forest toward their entry point. His escape took nearly 18 hours of continuous travel, as he became disoriented in the darkness and had to wait for daylight to re-establish his bearings. He reached the nearest village in a state of severe dehydration and psychological trauma. Local authorities contacted regional police, who organized a search party to investigate Harto's claims about his missing companions. The search team included experienced forest rangers and tribal guides familiar with the Bukit Satwa area. The investigation team located the abandoned campsite after following Harto's directions for 2 days. They found most of Marpong's equipment scattered across a wide area with clear signs of a violent struggle. The dealer's expensive dart gun had been broken into several pieces, and his transport cages had been crushed beyond recognition. Sirigar's backpack was found torn open, its contents scattered and partially buried. A torn piece of Anwar's jacket was recovered near a blood-smeared rock ledge. Searchers discovered human remains approximately 300 meters from the original campsite, hanging 18 feet above ground level in the fork of a massive tree. The remains consisted primarily of intestinal organs that had been draped across multiple branches, creating a gruesome display that shocked even experienced investigators. The pattern suggested deliberate placement rather than random predator behavior. Dr. Suharto Wijaya, the forensic specialist who examined the remains, noted that the injuries were consistent with an attack by an extremely powerful predator. However, the distribution of remains and the height at which they were found exceeded the capabilities of any known predator species in Sumatra. Tigers, the largest predators in the region, could not have carried human remains to such heights. Indra Harto never recovered from his experience in Bukit Satwa. The trauma left him unable to speak coherently about the incident, and he withdrew from all forest-related activities. He spent his remaining years in his village, staring toward the forest where his partners had disappeared and refusing to discuss what he had witnessed. The orangutan population in the affected area of Bukit Satwa showed signs of recovery following Marpong's death. Research teams documented increased activity and successful breeding that had been absent during periods of heavy poaching pressure. The ecosystem appeared to be rebalancing itself without the constant threat of illegal capture operations. Brindale Forest sprawled across 28 square miles of the Conwy Valley in North Wales, representing one of Britain's most ancient woodland areas. Dating back over 400 years, the forest had served various purposes throughout its history, from royal hunting grounds to commercial timber operations. By 2001, much of the forest had been designated as a site of special scientific interest, protecting its unique ecosystem of native oak, birch, and pine trees. Ghost Ridge earned its name during the 18th century, when local shepherds reported strange encounters with unexplained phenomena in the area's most remote sections. The ridge formed a natural barrier between the main forest and abandoned slate quarries that had operated during the Victorian era. Dense undergrowth and treacherous terrain made the area nearly inaccessible to casual hikers, creating a sanctuary for wildlife that preferred to avoid human contact. Albert Morgan had operated as an illegal trapper throughout North Wales for over 15 years by 2001. The 43-year-old former quarry worker specialized in capturing protected species for private collectors who paid substantial sums for rare British wildlife. His primary targets included pine martens, red squirrels, and various bird species that had become increasingly scarce due to habitat destruction. Morgan's trapping methods involved sophisticated snare systems that could capture animals without causing visible damage that might reduce their market value. He maintained dozens of trap lines throughout remote forest areas, checking them regularly to ensure captured animals remained alive and healthy. His success rate exceeded that of most professional trappers, largely due to his willingness to operate in areas that other poachers considered too dangerous. Liam Morgan, Albert's younger cousin, occasionally assisted with the trapping operations, despite his discomfort with the illegal activities. The 36-year-old farm laborer possessed excellent knowledge of local wildlife behavior and forest navigation skills. However, Liam harbored deep-seated fears about certain forest areas, particularly Ghost Ridge, where family legends spoke of dangerous encounters with unknown creatures. On July 23, 2001, Albert planned to check a series of snares he had positioned along Ghost Ridge during the previous week. Intelligence from local bird watchers suggested that several protected species frequented the area, including a family of pine martens that could command prices exceeding £3,000 each. The potential profit justified the risks associated with operating in such a remote location. Albert set out alone that morning, despite Liam's offer to accompany him, claiming that the difficult terrain required only one person to avoid detection by forest rangers. He carried his usual equipment, including replacement snares, handling cages, and emergency supplies. According to his established routine, Albert should have returned by early evening to report on his trap-checking activities. When Albert failed to appear by midnight, Liam became concerned enough to contact other family members about his cousin's disappearance. They decided to wait until morning before organizing a search, assuming that Albert had been delayed by weather conditions or equipment problems. The following morning, Liam organized a search party consisting of several experienced locals who knew the forest well. The group included retired forester David Evans, who had worked in Brindale for over 30 years and possessed intimate knowledge of the most remote areas. They followed Albert's most likely route toward Ghost Ridge, looking for signs of his passage through the dense undergrowth. The search party discovered Albert's abandoned equipment approximately 2 miles from the main forest trail, scattered across a small clearing that showed clear signs of a violent struggle. His handling cages had been crushed beyond recognition, and several replacement snares lay twisted among the debris. Most disturbing was the complete absence of Albert himself, despite the extensive evidence of conflict. Liam found his cousin's remains approximately 50 meters from the equipment site, distributed across an area that defied easy explanation. What remained of Albert consisted primarily of internal organs that had been arranged in a pattern suggesting deliberate placement rather than random predator behavior. The victim's severed boot lay nearby, containing portions of his lower leg that showed distinctive bite marks. The forensic examination revealed that Albert had been attacked by something with tremendous strength and unusual feeding patterns. Dr. Margaret Phillips, the pathologist who examined the remains, noted that the bite marks were inconsistent with any known predator species in Wales. The spacing and depth of the marks exceeded the capabilities of badgers, foxes, or feral dogs that occasionally inhabited the forest. Most puzzling was the discovery of claw marks on surrounding tree trunks at chest height, approximately 5 feet above ground level. The marks appeared fresh and showed a pattern that differed significantly from typical animal claws. The spacing between individual claw marks measured nearly 4 inches, far exceeding the dimensions of any documented British wildlife. Detective Inspector Sarah Williams, who led the official investigation, noted several aspects of the crime scene that complicated standard explanations. The systematic destruction of Albert's equipment suggested intelligence and purpose beyond typical animal behavior. The arrangement of remains indicated a level of deliberate action inconsistent with normal predator feeding patterns. Local police consulted with wildlife experts from the Forestry Commission and various university zoology departments. The consensus opinion suggested that Albert had been killed by a large dog or possibly a pack of feral dogs. However, this explanation failed to account for the unusual claw marks and distinctive bite patterns found on the remains. Liam Morgan provided detailed testimony about discovering his cousin's remains, but his account included elements that investigators found difficult to verify. He claimed that something with shoulders broader than any human had been watching him from the tree line as he fled the scene. The witness also reported hearing sounds that resembled human speech but used no recognizable word. Following Albert's death, illegal trapping activities in the Ghost Ridge area ceased entirely. Other poachers who had previously operated in the forest began avoiding the remote sections where Albert had been killed. The local ecosystem showed signs of rapid recovery, with pine marten populations beginning to show evidence of successful breeding seasons. The official investigation concluded that Albert Morgan had been killed by feral dogs, despite inconsistencies in the forensic evidence. However, no subsequent incidents occurred, and Ghost Ridge retained its reputation as a place where natural forces operated beyond human understanding. Valverde Biological Reserve encompassed over 400 square kilometers of primary tropical rainforest on Costa Rica's Osa Peninsula, representing one of the most biodiverse ecosystems on Earth. Established in 1975, the park protected habitat for over 500 tree species, nearly 400 bird species, and countless other organisms that existed nowhere else on the planet. The reserve's remote location and strict access controls made it one of Central America's most pristine wilderness areas. The Grove of Echoes occupied a particularly isolated section of the reserve's interior, accessible only through unmarked trails that required expert navigation skills. This area earned its name from the unusual acoustic properties created by the dense canopy structure, where sounds seemed to reverberate and multiply in patterns that confused and disoriented visitors. The grove's reputation among local guides included warnings about people who had entered the area and never returned. Mateo Luna, a biologist specializing in predator ecology, had earned international recognition for his work on large carnivore behavior in tropical ecosystems by 2016. The 34-year-old scientist conducted field studies in some of the world's most remote habitats, seeking to better understand the roles apex predators played in maintaining ecological balance. His fieldwork emphasized stealth and minimal impact, using remote acoustic monitors, scent traps, and environmental sampling to collect data without disturbing wildlife. His mission in Valverde was part of a broader study funded by the Global Biodiversity Preservation Initiative, aimed at assessing predator distribution patterns in uncharted rainforest sectors. The Grove of Echoes had become a focal point of interest due to unusual audio anomalies captured during earlier expeditions. These sounds did not match any known animal vocalizations, and were often accompanied by mysterious disruptions in wildlife activity. Franco Ruiz, a 29-year-old expert in wildlife tracking and ethnobotany, joined Luna for the expedition. Ruiz's knowledge of traditional navigation techniques and local ecology proved invaluable in areas where GPS often failed under dense canopy. While trained in science, he often spoke of guardian spirits and forest intelligences that protected sacred places from human disturbance, a belief system rooted in generations of oral tradition among the peninsula's indigenous communities. In June 2016, the Grove became the subject of a multidisciplinary research expedition led by Luna and Ruiz. Preliminary reports from acoustic sensors suggested the presence of unknown vocal patterns and environmental disruptions, possibly linked to a rare predator population. Some speculated melanistic jaguars could be involved, though no confirmed sightings had occurred in decades. Luna hoped to verify these claims using state-of-the-art monitoring equipment. On June 12th, Luna and Ruiz entered Valverde through an approved research corridor, carrying specialized, non-invasive tools, including parabolic microphones, bioacoustic recorders, scent markers, environmental sensors, and emergency supplies for extended operations. They intended to spend 3 days within the Grove, deploying new sensors and investigating the source of the vocal anomalies without disturbing the area's natural rhythms. The Grove of Echoes lay approximately 12 kilometers from their entry point, accessible through a network of animal trails that required careful navigation. The terrain presented significant challenges, including river crossings, steep ravines, and sections where fallen trees created nearly impassable barriers. Ruiz's skills as a tracker and navigator proved essential for making progress through the difficult landscape. On their second day, the pair located evidence of large animal presence, including claw marks, bedding areas, and disturbed foliage. As they began deploying equipment, they noted a dramatic drop in animal activity. Luna recorded in his field journal that the forest sounds seem to vanish here, as if the trees themselves are holding their breath. According to Ruiz's later interview with the Costa Rican Environmental Research Council, their second night in the Grove passed without incident. However, the third morning brought an unusual atmosphere that made him increasingly uncomfortable. The normally vocal rainforest had grown unnaturally quiet, with even the constant background noise of insects and birds falling to barely audible levels. Luna dismissed his partner's concerns as misinterpretation of natural cycles and continued preparing their final set of sensor placements. He had invested significant resources in the expedition and was determined to finish collecting data before their scheduled extraction. He wrote in his notes about tension in the atmosphere and the need to remain grounded in the science, not the superstition. As evening approached on their third day, Luna set up a base near a natural clearing where many of the anomalous recordings had originated. He had arranged a system of sound-activated triggers and perimeter sensors to capture ultrasonic frequencies and vibrations. Ruiz remained approximately 100 meters away, maintaining visual contact through signal lights and low-frequency radio pings. The forest around them had grown completely silent by dusk, creating an oppressive atmosphere that Ruiz found increasingly disturbing. He reported later that the silence felt unnatural, as if something large and predatory had entered the area and frightened away all other wildlife. The air itself seemed to carry a sense of impending danger. Around midnight, Ruiz heard a deep grunt echoing through the grove, followed immediately by the sound of crashing branches and splintering wood. The noise suggested something massive moving through the forest canopy with tremendous force. Ruiz called out warnings to his partner, but received no response from Luna's position near the clearing. The crashing sounds continued for several minutes before gradually fading into complete silence. Ruiz waited in his hiding place until dawn, then carefully approached Luna's last known position. He found the equipment scattered, as though torn from its moorings, with clear signs of a violent disturbance that had flattened the surrounding vegetation. Ruiz searched the site and found partial remains, including a boot containing portions of Luna's foot and a fragment of jawbone. Strange claw marks led up multiple tree trunks, some exceeding heights of 10 feet, and the underbrush appeared to have been crushed by something with immense strength. Ruiz abandoned all gear and fled through the rainforest toward the park boundary. Becoming disoriented in his panic, and requiring 2 days to reach safety.